Quando vedete un bell'horror pieno di litri di sangue che schizzano da tutte le parti, vi siete mai chiesti: ci vuole più tempo a girarlo o a pulire il sangue? Questa e tante altre curiosità sul mondo dell'horror ci sono state raccontate da Chris Nash, regista, il cui nuovo film In a Violent Nature è appena disponibile su tutte le piattaforme streaming. Ed è un horror molto molto interessante perché la storia è raccontata dal punto di vista dell'assassino. Abbiamo avuto l'opportunità di intervistarlo presso il NOAM Film Festival di Faenza, dove appunto Teo Yusufian gli ha fatto un sacco di domande super interessanti. Ma prima di lasciarvi all'intervista vi ricordo di iscrivervi al canale, cliccare sul like e aiutarci a far crescere questo canale e insomma non perdetevi tutti i prossimi contenuti che pubblicheremo. Ma adesso vai con l'intervista.
Hi Chris, welcome to Italy, welcome to the NOAM Faenza Film Festival. How are you doing?
I'm doing great this morning. Thank you so much.
Okay, so before the interview, you told me that it's your first time that you leave North America.
Yeah.
And how is this going so far?
I still haven't caught up. I can't give you an answer.
Okay.
We're still dealing with a lot of things right now. But it's okay. Everybody's been very nice and helping me through that. So that's great.
Our first question is there a moment or a movie that you remember that made you think, okay, I want to be a filmmaker?
Filmmaker, no. I always wanted to be a storyteller. I always really liked writing. I really like stories. When I grew up, I was always writing stories and trying to like write a novel or do something big. And, you know, of course, failing all the time. But from there, I started really getting into comic books and I loved comic books. I wanted to be a comic book artist. Then that eventually turned into becoming an animator. Up until like maybe halfway through my high school, I was going to school to become an animator and I just wanted to do that. But I did not have the artistic talent. I could not draw at all. At my very last year of high school, I just pivoted and thought I'll try to get into film instead because then I could tell stories in my head faster. And 20 years, that's how fast it takes. To make a film, apparently.
So which kind of comics you read, you loved?
I really liked comic strips growing up. So I liked Calvin and Hobbes or Peanuts. And then from there, I got into actual comic books. And the comic books, I really liked House of Mystery. I liked House of Secrets. I had a fascination with Tales from the Crypt because I couldn't get a hold of them as comic books because they were clearly out of print. But eventually they did do a second pressing collection and I got those as a kid. But yeah, all the horror comic books, all the anthology horror stories, I really like those.
What were your role models in cinema?
I really liked Cronenberg a lot. He seems like a very easy grasp when you're a kid growing up in Canada. But I don't think a lot of kids in Canada really watched a lot of Cronenberg. But yeah, there were a few Canadian filmmakers that I really looked up to specifically because they were doing it in Canada. So I really liked Cronenberg. I liked John Fawcett a lot. He did Ginger Snaps. But before that, he did a really great, interesting crime film called The Boys Club. Vincenzo Natali, who did Cube. There's also another Canadian director named Bruce McDonald. He was more of like a very punk rock, lo-fi, like low-budget director who just got his friends together and they would just go across the province or go across the country or go on road trips and make these punk rock movies, which I loved. And the writer that he worked with a lot, Don McKellar, ended up becoming an Academy Award winning nominee. He just wrote Park Chan-wook's new series, The Sympathizer.
What is the difference that you saw between your expectation before coming on the set and the reality of the set?
I think that depends on what role I took on. When I first left the small town I grew up in Ontario and moved to Toronto for film school, that first year I ended up working as a boom operator on a super low budget indie horror film that was shooting for a little over a month. And that was my first on-set experience of like, from then it just seemed like possible, I guess, watching everything happen. But from that point of view, you're just one person doing one job on the film, but it does make it seem so much easier. And then once you jump to directing it, and then you have to kind of coordinate and be the maestro of like figuring out how all these move together. It's an entirely different job. And and I've directed short films in the past, but jumping from like just a crew of your friends to a giant crew of people that don't know necessarily how you communicate, or you don't have that shorthand that happens, that comes from friendship. It's very, very daunting. Yeah.
About this, if you could give an advice to do yourself on the set of In a Violent Nature today, what kind of advice you give to yourself?
Probably it would have to be before we started shooting it. Because once you're shooting it, you're just on the roller coaster. I would say before I started shooting it, give yourself more pre-production time. I think development time and pre-production time is so crucial, and you're always going to wish you had more of it. So yeah, that would be my big tip.
I have a question, because many horror fans, when they watch a movie, they maybe don't realize working with blood, what it means on set. Would you tell us some stories, or how do you manage blood? Yeah,
blood, it's necessary, but it's so terrible. It's sticky, and you just feel gross, and everything sticks to everything. So we shot predominantly outdoors in exterior locations, and very remote locations too. One thing we learned is that you can never pack enough blood. When you run out of blood and you're 2 hours away from like your base camp or your workshop, then you're missing a lot of your day. Even when you have something and you dress it in blood, and then the shot is this bloody character falls to the ground, then you've just glued so much dirt and sticks and and leaves and everything to these characters, that now you have to spend 5, 10, 20 minutes cleaning up before you can reset. So everything takes so much longer when you involve blood. Also for special effects where you have to rig like tubing and pumps to have blood like spurt through a neck or an arm or a stomach or any kind of squibs. It all takes so much time to prepare, and it's necessary time. And you're dealing with a lot of different physics elements coming to play into one thing as well. So you're never going to get exactly what you thought you wanted. For every minute you don't give of prep, you lower the chances of even coming close to what you wanted significantly. So working with blood is pretty terrible. It's just a really great question as far as horror films go.
Thanks.
So I wonder why now, how many times you thought, oh my God, there's too much blood on this movie, because there's so much blood in A Violent Nature.
Yeah, you don't think about that too much when you're writing it, but then when it comes down to doing it, you realize like what you have to do.
I'd like to stay on the bloody scene for another question. How can you think about that scene on the top of the cliff?
Yeah.
With the hook? I never saw something like that. What was the process to do something like that?
Yeah, it's really just, you try not to think about it too much, but you just kind of write what seems natural, I guess, from the character's perspective. And since In a Violent Nature is like told through the perspective of a slasher, you just feel like, he's alone, he's by himself. What kind of flair could he put on this kill? You're writing each scene individually, and you kind of write it from different parts all at once. So if I might want to know where it ends up, or I might have this one beat in a kill that I'm like, oh, this would be a lot of fun, then it's a lot of backwards engineering to figure out, okay, how do we get there? So I understood the crescendo of where I wanted that kill to happen. And then it's a lot of just thinking like, where would these certain body parts be before that? How do we get these body parts where we want them? It's also just kind of a free jazz thing where you're just letting it go and seeing like, how far can we take this?
Is there a movie that came out recently that made you think, oh, wow, this I'd like to direct by myself?
I don't think so. When I was younger, there were definitely films I would be like, oh, that's that movie is just tapping into so many aspects of my personality at the moment that I'm like, oh, this is my kind of thing. And also when you're younger and not making a movie and just wanting to make movies, you see things that you feel like, this is the kind of thing I want to do. I wish I would have done that. So there were definitely films like that for me. Like, I remember walking out of Cabin Fever and feeling this is such a great film. Like a perfect film that I wish I could direct. It just had that sense of humor about it. It had all the gore, but lately, when I watch films, I just appreciate the perspective of the filmmaker coming through and feeling like I can learn a little bit about them just by watching their films. And I don't have that sense of envy or even competitiveness, I guess.
Do you think that this is because you became a filmmaker, or?
Definitely, yeah. I used to actually viscerally hate films. If there was a film that I didn't like, I would just be like, that movie sucked. I hate that movie so much. But after making a feature and like putting it out there, I just understand. I look at every movie from a different point of view. I have no idea how hard this movie was to make. I have no idea what their original intention was. But at the end of the day, you do have to produce something. You can't let all of that like just sit in a closet, especially if you're on the hook to a distributor or to a financier. Like, you have to make a movie. So I don't hold filmmakers in like filmmaker jail anymore if they didn't do something that I liked. I started watching movies in a way of like treating everything that I see on screen as very purposeful and having to ask myself why they made that decision rather than, oh, they made the wrong decision.
Do you think that the polarization of the opinions on the internet now for movie fans is doing damage to the independent filmmakers?
That's a really tough question. I don't know. It's something that I think about. I think about Letterboxd and how much I dislike Letterboxd because not everybody is a critic. I don't want to necessarily not give everyone a voice. It's not like Twitter where everybody could before Letterboxd could go on Twitter and say, hey, I watched a really bad movie. Letterboxd frames it in a way of these are film critiques, and they're not, because it's like somebody saying that they're a culinary critic because they eat McDonald's 6 days out of the week. And then one day a month, they might have like Five Guys burgers or something. And then they're like, oh, I'm an expert on film. I really, every now and then through all the Transformers and Marvel, I'll watch this really screwed up movie that A24 put out. And then you're like, oh, I'm a film critic now. I think any discussion of film ultimately should be beneficial, but treating every bit of discussion as if it's on the same level, I think maybe not.
Maybe this is a long shot because you just did your first feature. So is there something that you really want to do? A movie that you have in your mind, but you already know now that it will be impossible to do?
I would assume that every filmmaker dies with an impossible project in their mind. Maybe not Francis Ford Coppola. Maybe he got his out. But there's one that I've actually had since I was 16 years old. That's just been growing in little bits, adding to it every year that I know will never, ever, ever get made. But I would like to at least write that out somehow one day. The one film that I would really love, but I'd really love to make a baseball movie at some point in time.
What is the best baseball movie for you?
Barry Levinson's The Natural. Have you seen it? Robert Redford, Glenn Close is in it. Robert Duvall. Kim Basinger. It's an amazing cast. It was a movie that I watched a lot as a kid. It treats baseball in a very mythological lens. I love that film.
Is it baseball popular in Canada as in the US?
I mean, hockey is always going to be more popular in Canada. I think for me, it really was that movie that made me I do like baseball because of that.
You were not a baseball fan. You loved the movie about baseball, and then you became a baseball fan.
I don't even know if I'm a huge baseball fan. I just like baseball movies. Okay.
I've got a last question. I don't know if you have any.
It's about the movie general status today in America. You said you were a comic book fan as a kid, as I was. In America, like in North America, in Canada, one would think of superheroes comics as a first choice, but you were talking about strips and different kind of comics. What do you think about the situation with superhero movies and the popularity of the genre, and maybe it's starting to fade or it's fading already? The connection between comic books and even, I don't know, Japanese comic books and the world of cinema and TV shows?
That's a really interesting question that I've never thought about, but I think it just goes to show what is the cultural temperament, because Japanese comic books, like there's that very clear link between manga and anime, and even that crossover into like American markets, where I think that, I don't know whether it's out yet, but that new Uzumaki series that's on Adult Swim, that's supposed to be great, but like, so Junji Ito, like his work, I've got to admit, I don't know too much about Italian comic books. All I know is Dylan Dog.
They're making a James Wan TV show on.
Really?
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Dylan Dog.
Okay, because I think the closest that came to that was, this is going to be a horrible pronunciation, sorry, Delamore Delamorte, right? But yeah, I think as far as North America and American comics, I mean, there is that superhero tradition, which I think is very emblematic of the view and the personality of like North American culture. But there is that, like, running parallel to that was this huge underground comic scene too, and even like the EC comics with, you know, Tales from the Crypt and like Vault of Horror and all of those, moving into the watered down version of all of those became House of Secrets, House of Mystery, all that kind of thing, where they weren't so grotesque. Yeah, I think that there is a lot of potential. I would love there to be another Tales from the Crypt movie. Demon Knight is like one of my favorite horror films and one of the ones I watched so much as a child. I feel like there is probably a whole section of comics and stories that are just ripe to be adapted. But who knows? Maybe James Gunn, being the head of DC right now, maybe he should be allowing low budget horror filmmakers to just giving them like $1 million budgets to go, like, here's $1 million, go make a really cheap adaptation of this story in this anthology. Like, that would be amazing.
When the Western genre was fading, I think they came out some of the best Westerns because they didn't have reverence to the genre. So Sergio Leone. So maybe the same thing could happen to the comic book movies genre.
Yeah, perhaps. Hopefully. Just something to shake it up.
In A Violent Nature, I told you before the interview that I loved. I really want to say this kind of thing is the last nail on the coffin of the slasher movies as we know it. You take this subgenre of the slasher and you develop in a very original way. So I want to ask you, if your intentions are similar for your next projects, you will explore more the horror genre, or you think that maybe is another way to tell your story?
Well, for the next project that I want to do, I think they're always going to be slightly different from something else. I think years and years and years ago, I was listening to some interview, I think it might have been with David Chase, talking about The Sopranos and why The Sopranos is so successful. And he's like, well, I just took a very, very familiar genre of filmmaking, a very familiar world of film, and then I turned the camera like 10 degrees. We're just going to move it from all of the actual crime boss politics to family politics, but within that world. And I just thought that is how art grows and how art moves. You do need to have a familiar entry point for the audience in order to tell something different. And that's also just exploitation filmmaking. So I think that exploitation filmmaking is a lost art. Or there aren't any real true exploitation films anymore. There are very, very few directors and writers who are trying to tell stories within the framework of other stories that we already know. There really needs to be another Roger Corman who is just like, I want a killer fish movie. Go make your killer fish movie. And then it becomes about, then some director has that opportunity and is like, well, I want to make a movie about big business encroaching on a small town. And I will make a killer fish movie about that. And so they get to talk about topics that they actually want to talk about and discuss. And that's exactly the kind of film that I want to make. Whatever I do next, it's going to be an exploitation film of some kind. So, yeah.
Thank you. Great. We are eager to see your next project. And thank you again for the interview.
Thank you so much.
We hope you the best for your future.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris.